that's discernment. So when we have spirits that are rebellious, it's like, I am, you are, we are. Who's you? Who dis? Right? Who am I talking to? What's your choice? And that's discernment. So when we have spirits that are rebellious, it's like children, again, as parents, this is what gave me this insight is that, and dealing with people. If I'm in a group of people and everyone's going to drink the Kool-Aid, I'm going to say no. And then I have to deal with it because I'm listening to me. Me says this. Also, even if I'm getting directed, I'm the one that has to do it. So do not ever release your authentic self, your autonomy, your inner voice that's telling you, maybe this isn't a good idea. But we get swept up in these waves of influence. Influence is what I mentioned as the key to dealing with these familiars, with Instagram, with social media, with other people. We must understand how influence comes, and then you find your center and your pillar in the middle of it.
Right. We have so many influences, but sometimes because we have so little experience with the spirit world, people prioritize a voice that has no body because they just don't know how to interact with that. They don't have the discernment for such a thing, which is why the military develops technologies to put voices in your skull, because they know if a guy in fatigues or in a Men in Black suit comes and tells you to do something, you'll be skeptical. But if they just beam it into your head,
you'll do it. DARPA, man. Yeah, the radio wave, that's been going on a long time, which if every individual had better discernment, I feel like that would be maybe the best start we could make to navigate.
Yeah, I'm with you. So I know you've had a lot of experiences with spirits. When I've talked to other people who do have a ton of experience, with the themes of discernment and testing, a lot of times from what I hear, spirits are always trying to enter into some kind of contract or relationship. It's a mechanism that's there. And a lot of times they will offer you things or make promises. A lot of times they don't even have the power to keep their own promises. And people who engage with spirit activity have often said to me that it's good to test the spirit and even say hey, if you think you can do what you just said you would promise, then prove it. Show me something in reality. Because there are spirits apparently that can talk but not affect reality. And then there are spirits that can, or maybe they don't want to or whatever. But if you're going to make some kind of deal that you can affect my life in a positive way, if I do this, that, or the other, then before we even engage with that, I want you to prove that you can affect reality in any way, shape, or form. Have you done that kind of test? Do you have any stories of entities that start as a voice, try to offer an engagement, and then they have to prove themselves and actually end up doing so?
Sure, that's a great question. I don't like contracts like we talked about before, so I don't do that
Amen.
with spirits either. But I have expressed doubt to spirit and then it directly proved. So as I was coming into contact with what I would just call my informant, I guess, for me, a big part of it is they'll give me data. But then I have experienced, I guess, what you would call thaumaturgy, where it had an effect in the real world. So I'm instructed not to boast because also as soon as I say something amazing that happened, everyone's like, oh, prove it, and you get all these amazing Randys that want to show how dumb you are or whatever. But it's always different and it's always spontaneous when I experience what I would call the proof. The first time I experienced it, I was a teenager and I was having a lot of trouble in my family and in my house. And I just would leave all the time and go to the woods. Okay. So I went to the woods and to the beach and I picked up a rock and I said to spirit, if you're there, show me. And it was a rainy day in Seattle. It was raining on the beach. You're so dramatic, sitting there in the rain on the beach, holding this rock. And I go, show me you're there. And I threw the rock in the water. Literally the clouds parted and a sunbeam shone on where I had thrown the rock. So I'll ask for verification and I'll receive it. But I've definitely been able to experience some of those events where we asked for proof and other people witnessed. So that's how I can also break out of delusion. I encourage people to do it with other people. That's why I like mediating sessions with people, because we can both have a like, what? Where like once I was doing just a simple reading in the park with a girl. I pull a card. She says butterfly. I put the card down and a butterfly comes and lands on my hand. So things that are like, there's coincidence, but then there's like, that's too much, right?
Yeah.
So I get verification. I get that acknowledgement, that proof that you're talking about, where they have to like make with the goods. I need something real, or how do I keep operating without being totally insane?
Right. I think part of it is we don't think about reality as its own language. Like just even events or happenings are part of a greater language or communication. And it is interesting. We don't ask. I mean, I am engaged with people like you all the time, and I'm reminded to ask or to engage, and I really just don't. I'm almost 40 years old.
Should we ask right now?
Sure. What would we ask?
Greg, what's your middle name?
You want me to tell you, or are the spirits going to tell you?
You don't have to. You can say it inside your head, because I like going into the center. So
Okay.
we go into the middle. So if you will think about your middle name, and I'll think about my middle name at the same time, and then we're just going to open a little space, and then we can make a request for a verification. What request would feel good where we could receive something? Even if it's by the end of the day, I know maybe it's a bummer for other people, but sometimes time is weird. Or maybe it'll show up for everyone else that is listening too, where they'll get this corroboration too. We can ask for a specific symbol or something to show up that would be a verification. What should we choose?
Well, I guess I would just remain open. Like when it's funny you say middle name because I hate my middle name and I don't talk about it often. So if you determined it, it would be interesting.
I don't know why I even said it.
It'd be a hard one for you to get, I think. But when you say this, I try to open a space mentally and a Rolodex of female names just starts going through my head. And I'm like, Michelle, Andrea.
What about a thing? So you get nouns. Okay, so we'll look at this like a dork that I am, but you're receiving nouns. So a noun is like a person, place, or thing, and you're getting names to show up. That was what immediately headed into your head. So let's think, what was the first of those names that appeared?
I think Michelle.
Michelle is Archangel Michael. So we could ask for some corroboration that would be Michelle or Michael. Do you know what the name Michael stands for, and Michelle, what it means? And we can do a fun thing, because that's what spiritual names are. They're actually directives, especially with an angel. It doesn't just mean the name, like Michael, Gabriel, Michelle. Those have a very important suffix, which is L, E-L. And that's the unifier God, not Yahweh, not the Thunder King, not these other demiurges, but El, which is collective, like Elohim. So anytime we have a name like Michelle, it has that collective name in it.
Right, it does. Well, I guess what I'm saying is like if I'm like, oh, well, maybe I'll open a mental space. And if I'm trying to get your middle name, like obviously just female names cycle through the mind, I would hope that, something would come to be like, oh, there's verification that that is it. But
oh, for like my middle name. Oh, funny.
Yeah, I mean, if we were to telepathically try to determine each other's middle names from means that are not obvious, that's, what I would do. It's kind of like I've done remote viewing. I remember early in the show, I had a remote viewer on and we did a live exercise, and it was very, very accurate. My wife had a small statuette of the San Francisco Bay Bridge, and the person on the other line was like, I'm getting a red triangle. And it's like, wow, the shape is basically two red triangles. Like, that's pretty damn specific. So, I was trying to do something similar.
Well, it's just funny because Michael is my familiar spirit. I didn't know you were trying to guess my middle name.
Oh, well.
In that, but it's the name of my familiar is what is kind of funny. And that's who protects. So kind of like what it's a protection saved from danger.
Well, I know I grew up in a religious background. So as a kid, your first confirmation and all this stuff, your grandparents are giving you things of like your name and what it means. And Gregory means shepherd. And it's kind of like what I do is lead conversations that other people listen to for advice or for insight. And so it kind of fits.
I saw like Hecate for your middle, which is funny because
Uh-oh.
that's like the underworld goddess. Were you named after like a grandfather or an uncle for your middle name?
No,
Oh, just picked it random, huh?
I'm a junior. So I guess it would be derived from my dad. But as far as I know, I don't know where his middle name came from.
So for an ancestor then. So it's not your name. That could be why you don't like it because it's not yours. It's one of your ancestors' names.
Yeah, partly, probably. I mean, I could tell you what it is. And then with my first and last name, it would be pretty clear why I don't like it.
My personal middle name is Dakini, which I always hated because I would get made fun of and they would call me Dakini Bikini. But Dakini, my mom lived in Tibet. So I was actually conceived on the Himalayan mountains in Tibet because she was a hippie and was up there learning. She would draw tankas. And Dakini is an entity in Tibetan Buddhism that's like an angelic figure that guides you through the world of the dead.
Interesting. I figured yours wouldn't be conventional because it's got to fit in between an unconventional first and last name. I did think about this, like, because your partner said that you've done live I Ching readings before, and you mentioned the 3-card spread. I don't know which is easiest to do on the fly, but if we had a big question that even the audience would be even more interested in than my middle name, like what are those drones doing in New Jersey? So I guess I would say out of your toolbox, pick a tool that you think would be most useful for this type of question, and then we can phrase it appropriately and then see what comes up.
Let's pull cards. I have my deck here. This is just the traditional Pamela Coleman Smith deck. It's so funny because I had synchronicities for the New Jersey drones. The way I experienced the synchronicity was I kept getting all these article hits on the Hindu temple and all these statues of Hindu statues in New Jersey. So I was sent by multiple people the same day all this news about the giant temple that's in New Jersey. And then, bam, all of the drone stuff at the same time. So nobody talks to me about New Jersey, okay, like ever. And then all of a sudden, the same day, I have multiple people. They send me the Hindu temple as being like a thing there, and then all the drone stuff the exact same time. So that was interesting to me. That's how I found out about the drones, was through this weird sync up with the temple. And who would think a giant Hindu temple in New Jersey?
Right.
Not something I would have ever known was there. And then all of it came through. So maybe we can do a 3-card spread. What do we want to know about the drones? Sometimes I can leave it open and I'll just say, like, how about the drones over New Jersey? What are they? Who sent them? What do you think is the most important to know?
Well, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but what I hear is that they use FAA lighting. So it's not really a mystery where they come from. I think it's pretty understood that they are government. They just don't want to talk about it. So that wouldn't be the most interesting answer. I want to know why they're flying around. What is the greater purpose or the mystery behind why they're in use?
Let's do it. So I'll pull 3 cards for why are they using drones in New Jersey. Okay. First card we get is the Hanged Man.
Uh-oh. That's a big one. Potent card.
It's a pretty big one. Hanged Man is the card of Odin, where he hangs himself from the tree in order to gain insight and to see. Do you see how he has this little circle around his head?
Mm-hmm.
It's for insight or gaining knowledge. He's also the god of the crossroads. So if I was to interpret this card literally, on the first level, they're literally looking for the road outlay or taking pictures of the roads because it's a crossroad god. It's also looking for insight or information. So we would say also literally they're data collecting, which would mean that they're surveillance. So with the Hanged Man, we know that their reason is to spy.
That resonates.
And specifically at crossroads or intersections, they're trying to see who's where.
Yeah, there's a couple different scenarios that have been bandied about in conspiracy land. And there's one that talking to my wife, we think it's probably this one thing. I'm curious if it comes up in the 3 cards, but we'll see.
Let's see. The second card that we do get is 6 of Swords. This is very specifically an immigrant card or like homeless people. So this would be looking for people that don't belong there, would be the second part of it. 6 of Swords, you can see they're like crossing on a boat where there's rough waters there, but clear waters ahead, and it's someone who's literally migrating or immigrating. So that would mean they're spying on specific people that are from another country.
Okay, I can see that being true as well.
Which would be the second portion of what the card would indicate. They're trying to gain information. The third card is very interesting. We do get the Justice card. I usually interpret justice as bureaucracy or as government, and they're trying to actually gain data for some kind of law that they're about to make. Or we could interpret it as martial law in one way, right? Because this is the law, is why they're having the drones, which would mean to spy on people that don't belong there for the purposes of maybe using that for some kind of legal end or to enforce the law or make a law.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, that circles around a lot of the theories. A lot of times when we don't know something, you hear all the theories and then you kind of stack them in probabilities. And what I think is some of the most likely scenarios is people are talking about there being a rogue ISIS group out there with a dirty bomb, and that these drones actually can detect radiation at night. And that's why they're mainly at night, is they're trying to detect the radiation signature to find a lost nuclear device that could go off. Another thing that gets talked about is that it is a psyop, and they're seeding the story I just kind of relayed, and that there's really nothing there, but they want to put it out there in the sense that like it scares people, and
or they're developing it and they're going to blame it on somebody else.
Yeah, it creates a context for this might happen more often in our life. Eyes in the sky over us. The immigrant thing is interesting. We've talked about that before. Like a lot of people are happy that Trump won as opposed to the alternative. And his big focus is the immigrants. And then you think, well, what does that really look like? All right, see you later. You got me. No, it might mean dragging people out. This will result in some kind of contact tracing in terms of who was exposed, that they didn't get the digital ID with COVID. There's a theory that this will result in some kind of contact tracing in terms of who was exposed to the radiation. And that if this kind of comes out more often, we might have this thing where there's an app on our phone, a government app on our phone that's like, were you near a spot of radiation?
But they'll know because they can track us on the phones too. So,
well, right. So this is interesting. I mean, I think 3 interesting cards came up given the conclusions people are starting to circle around with these drones.
They definitely were around there. So,
right. We didn't get the 3 of Cups.
No, we didn't get anything nice. Those were not nice cards. Yeah.
I mean, and those are big cards too.
2 major arcana and 6 of Swords. If it's not immigrants, it can be specific to like a shore or the ocean, right? Because they're literally on a boat approaching the land. So I have literally gotten it so many times with clients for an immigrant or making a travel. So it could possibly be about something coming across the ocean would be the only other way I would interpret 6 of Swords.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I had the stories in mind, I mean, my first thought was a terrorist group. That's the story, the narrative. It's not necessarily the truth, but there's a narrative that might end up coming to light that a terrorist group has a dirty bomb somewhere in this area, and they were trying to find it without advertising that.
It's quite possible.
Yeah, we will see. I mean, like I said, by the time this airs, people will be like, the drone story, that was forever ago. That was in the old world of 2 weeks ago. I mean, I don't even know.
People lose attention so fast.
But they'll be able to vet what just happened and see if there's any merit to it.
Yes.
And so this is a difficult segue, but I wanted to ask you about this story from the book because I had a similar experience. Mine was in the woods, yours is in the water, but I liked this story of the bonfire from the Pacific Northwest. You write, admittedly, it was dark and we were drunk, but we were all undeniably sure we saw something on that special evening. We were talking rather loudly and without restraint. Suddenly, several of us were distracted by sounds and movements in the water just a few feet away. Then someone shushed everyone, and we all turned silently to gaze at the water. There was something there staring back at us. We shared what seemed like 10 minutes of silence trying to figure out what it was. It was raised up a few feet out of the water. At first, we thought it was a seal, but then it moved very strangely off to the side in a kind of gesture that was not animal like, but sentient. With a turn and swoosh, it rolled over in the water, splashing up its tail for all of us to see as it swam away. Although we never found out the identity of the creature we encountered that night, we all knew it purposefully came up to the shore to watch us, and I was hooked on the legends of the fish people ever since. Wow, I like it. I saw something very briefly at the edge of the woods that was like a shadow thing.
What did you see?
Well, it doesn't fit the description of anything, but it was some kind of humanoid creature that as soon as I saw it, it saw me and it kind of dissipated.
That was the feeling I had where it was like a mutual recognition. And that's a very specific moment where you link, there's a connection.
Mm-hmm. Well, you do write about the Oannes and the fish people, and I am really interested in all these different myths and legends of hybrid teachers or giants or ant people. Obviously, there's the story of the fallen angels and the Nephilim. You write about that too. And what I've liked about that as a conspiracy guy is some researchers tie it into royal bloodlines and the idea that the ruling class is trying to preserve this lineage and we might still be feeling the effects of that ancient story. I mean, it's not in question that elite bloodlines manage their bloodlines and their genealogy and family tree very specifically. The only question is, well, why do they do that? Why is it so preserved? And this is a wild explanation for it. But what do you think of just these myths in our ancient past of hybrid creatures and all this sort of thing? I mean, how literal should we take it?
I get into that a lot in the Familiars book as well. And I got first obsessed with it probably I learned my grandfather's Irish. So I looked into a lot of the Celtic stuff and I read Evans Went's Celtic Fairy Faith book where he went extensively researching some of those. And there's in heraldry, which shows like family lineage through symbols and shields. You know heraldry where it'll have like the family shield in Europe. There's one that has 3 legs. So it's 3 legs that go around. And I was like, what is this symbol? And it turns out that it shows that there's fairy blood.
Hell yeah.
In the lineage. And I was like, wait, what? Why haven't I heard of this? And some of those heraldic symbols are actually direct relations to the bloodline. Almost like in the Bible, how they do the begats, right? Of like, this is the lineage. And similarly, in China and in indigenous cultures, they have the totem poles. And so the totem poles, which they also have in China, are showing the different familiar spirits that are ruling over those families. And there is a direct connection to bloodlines because of ancestors. Okay, so as we say, why would they want a particular bloodline? I would argue if it's along the lines of like the fairy bloodlines where there's some kind of hybridism, they're keeping that in it. So I have a new thing that's going to be out, I don't know, in like a year, it's far away, but I made a new tarot deck about ancestors. And on one of my vision quests, I saw the handprints where they would show the hands. And I kept seeing these ones with 6 fingers, which of course is Nephilim lineages. And these are in like Goliath and Palestine and Gaza, funny enough, right? And the Syrians all had these 6-finger lineages. And that's literally what I was shown in the vision. So if you think like there's total genetic dispositions that come with bloodlines and lineages, that's just true. We can see it even in pets. Like say you're going to get a pet and that pet has in a lineage that has a specific genetic disease or they have specific genetic traits that are thought of as good.
Yeah, even personality traits. I've talked to ranchers that are like, you couldn't take over my herd because this herd has been put together over many generations to behave the right way. And if we have one that doesn't, we kind of get rid of that and we sell that one off.
Behavior traits, they have shown, I did research, they did all these tests on rats. When they trained rats to solve a maze, they scientifically showed their offspring could do the maze quicker than rats that weren't from that lineage. So why do they keep the bloodlines? To preserve these behavioral traits or dispositions, in my opinion. Just like, it's funny because in part of my vision, animal husbandry can be dated back to like ancient Egypt, where they would do these practices on purpose, and humans are sadly no different. Of course, this gets into lots of racist territory. This is Nazi stuff, right? Where like the Nazis are trying to show and it's offensive, of course. Because what? In my personal opinion, I don't adhere to any of these theories, but you can see just like animals, if a human animal has a disposition to a certain behavior, that can be bred into it genetically. That's just science. That's not crazy. Do certain races have better or worse things than other races? I would say no. And it would be more about looking at what every human being has a disposition to see what its affiliations are, right? Rather than judging it on race, it's going to be more like almost ability. So say, for example, you have someone who's gifted in music, and then you're going to see how many of their children then go on to be musicians. This actually happens quite a lot. Or if someone's a gifted athlete, a lot of their children could be gifted athletes too. It's literally not race related, but more individual related, in my opinion. Similarly, what I was shown, if certain people have spiritual attainments, their children can get those as well.
Well, yeah, for sure.
So I think it's interesting to think about it that way, more in terms of like human potential, rather than where it gets taken in a lot of these racist supremacists trying to make the ultimate human being. They always call themselves altruists, right? And you'll hear like human potential. A lot of these groups that are trying to do supreme human beings or see if we can genetically make the best human or even hybridize them. I studied biochemistry, so I look a lot at like part of what happened during COVID that nobody talks about, and I got shadow banned on social media for starting to talk about how they made humanized mice to do all the testing. They made mice that were 4% human. They're actively hybridizing humans and animals, pigs, monkeys.
In one of the books, there's a little bit about human cow hybridization.
Yep. Nobody's talking about that.
Right. Chimeras and all that.
Lots of chimeras. Okay. So I encourage people absolutely to please look into this because there's nothing we can do to stop it now. In a lot of religious texts, and it's why a lot of the conservative Republicans, including the Trump administration, put the ban on all of these stem cell research, and like the Planned Parenthood thing, I feel like wasn't as much about abortion, but was more about stopping some of these hybridization programs, because in Christianity, it's actually considered adultery. People think adultery is just when you have sex with other people's wives, but it's actually when you hybridize things because they want everything to its own kind. So this isn't my view, but a lot of the conservative Republican Christians don't want any of this scientific research because it's adultery.
Well, it's crazy because I'm not Christian, but there's a huge Christian conspiracy overlap. I mean, it's just there. I mean, now it wasn't when I started the show, but now it's like almost half the Republican Party is just like official policy is conspiracy stuff. But regardless, even if you go back to Atlantis and you hear some of the things Edgar Cayce would say about it, it's like part of their downfall was the mixing.
Adultery. Yep.
Yeah. And then you're like, well, are they trying to create revelations and are they trying to do all this stuff? Like, are the elite really spiteful of God and thus trying to corrupt the codes of reality, nature's codes? Is this a way that they're doing it? It brings you around to that kind of thinking, like, why is the Microsoft patent 666 involved in this kind of stuff? It's like, look, I don't want to think along these terms, but then it's like, are the elite at war with God?
It's just there, and you can see these cycles. And with a lot of these Atlantean conspiracies, if you look at the New Age material, they're all like, we keep destroying ourselves the same way. So they're all saying it all starts here. And then the flood of Noah comes when everything starts getting adulterated, humans and beasts mixed together. That's why God's like, stop it. No, cut it out. But I'm not saying I adhere to it, but it's very historical and all these things and channel material that keep saying, stop fucking doing that. And then we keep doing it, right? So there's a lot of medicine in particular is trying to actually make your immune system more open to more xeno alien things entering. Okay, so I study a lot of healing, a lot of medicine, and the human immune system basically is like take poison to heal your diseases. I'm not telling everyone to go take poison, so please don't mishear me. Please do not go take poison. But I study esoteric medicine, and it all says take venom, take poison, fuck your body up, and that's how you make yourself stronger.
It is a principle of homeopathy to take something your body can deal with to trigger your defenses, and then it takes away the thing that you have a problem with and the little bit of poison you gave your body. I mean, that seems to be the premise.
What do you take when you get cancer? Chemotherapy, which is every kind of terrible poison you can imagine that you take into your system. So it's just medicine, right? Medicine is poison, but dosed correctly. Anyway, part of that theory is if we keep introducing these xeno, alien, other genetics that will somehow become more powerful and maybe evade death. So part of this, what we're going to be seeing a lot of folks, I'm going to tell you, we got xenotransplants that they're currently trying to perfect, which means getting pig parts in us. We're having pig hearts. They're trying real hard to really nail xenotransplants, which is basically introducing alien genetic information into the human body, which is adultery. That's what they're doing. And that's part of what we're going to see happening in medicine more and more.
Yeah. And it's crazy that it just comes through the sciences. The sciences, it's like, well, we're just trying to make things better. And on the surface, sure, that sounds like a good goal. But better than what? Better than God's code? You know, and then you start messing with it. And then you're in this transhumanist nightmare where we're all cyborg pig people.
But we'll live forever, right?
Well, that's another thing. It is a fear of death. It's an attachment to materialism. It's like, how much more length of life are you going to get out of it? And is it worth it? Just reset the cycle.
The reason Taoist immortals would try to extend their life, I hope everyone hears me here. Why extend your life? He makes a good point, and this is what the Taoists say. It's in order to have more time to perfect your spiritual labor so that you can become an eternal being. By raising your awareness, it's actually, they said in their writings, people like Ge Hong, right? People like Sun Tzu Miao, the reason they're trying to extend their physical life is so that they could come into enlightenment and realization in order that they transcend it. Your fake tits and your perfect butt, this is not the purpose of why the immortals were seeking that. It was in order to come into understanding they already were eternal in their spirit form and transcend the flesh completely.
Right. Going back to the coat of arms thing, I think that's really interesting because you mentioned COVID, and during COVID, there was a lot of wild out there speculation that this is an operation to try to get everyone's genetics to gain control over where is the Nephilim bloodlines, where is the Merovingian bloodline. There's stuff in our history that we're not aware of that's not important to us, but it's important to them. And so they had to have a big operation to try to get the genetics. But how would you do that without the modern tools? Well, a coat of arms. A coat of arms would tell you, hey, this person's got the Fey folk bloodline over here. This person's got the Oannes bloodline. You know, there's a little bit of it there. And then you manage the marriages and you manage the children.
Or you have a Holocaust to get rid of entire bloodlines.
Well, yeah, you could do that, I suppose.
As has happened. I mean, they'll say, no, it wasn't about that. But then I don't really know what Holocausts are about. I can't conceive of it. But you're exactly correct. They have these markers of clan versus clan. And this goes back to tribalism, too. No human is exempt from this behavior. This is a natural behavior of trying to be alpha. There can be only one. right? It's that Saturn and Aries shadow I talked about, where it's that pyramid point where every species is going to try to dominate. So we have clan versus clan of who's going to win, who's most supreme, who is the all powerful. And so we'll try to like eradicate it genetically from the bloodline so that one can be the top most supreme superhuman, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Man. And, just talking about genetics and generations and all this kind of thing, when you get into the alien material, which I start to now think is way more like a modern version of angels and fairies and all that. But, a lot of people who experience these abductions, they'll have this happen. They'll be afraid to talk about it. And then they'll say something to their mom who says, "Oh, your grandma used to talk about that all the time. And even I've had some experiences." Now I think it's a call to shamanism. Maybe that's in someone's family line, but they don't have the context. So they're just getting picked up in the night and taken out into space. And like some being is like trying to give them information. And they're like, I don't know what to do with this. But yeah, there's things in our genetic lines that we aren't aware of because we don't even talk to each other in that way anymore. We don't talk to our grandparents about that. And it's just our whole culture has weeded that away from us. But do you think there's some truth to that in the alien sphere of things? I mean, there's no doubt people are having these experiences with humanoid beings. And oftentimes there's a download, like an informational download. They really just seem to want to show things. Or there's obviously the whole genetic experimentation thing. But do you think that has something more to do with shamanism than it does beings visiting from some other planet?
Sure. I would love to talk about that. I mean, that's where we start getting into all the star seed material.
I never know what to make about that. It gets a little cheesy sometimes.
Well, here we go. I'll tell you why it's bad when you look at it now. There's this phenomenon now as a result of social media, in my opinion, although maybe it's always been there, where people will copy and paste to talk about stuff they don't know anything about or have any experience with to show like they're cool. Oh, many tribes from indigenous cultures around the world, including like Australia, North America, Siberia, when you go into the shamanic material, there's star paths where we come from and where we go when we die. And this was part of the Serpent Mound mythology as well, where they're showing us these origin points. And now the Starseed people mostly will talk about how they're Pleiadian or Arcturian, right? This is what you're going to see on the interwebs. And they're always going to say 5D when they talk about star seeds. And so now it's gotten so broken telephoned, no one even knows what the heck they're talking about, in my opinion. But if you go into these indigenous shamanic cultures, and what happened to me in a vision quest, which was guided by Kelvin DeWolf, is that you go into the black hole, into the galactic center, and they take you to where your origin point was, which can be from some of these intergalactic places, such as different galaxies, different constellations, which constellations include stars that are different galaxies. What happened to me, which is coming up, P.S., I'll share this again. This is from the Micmac Loon people of Kelvin DeWolf, not me. I didn't make this up. Every December 21st at the winter solstice, the Earth is the closest to the galactic center, which is a supermassive black hole. Theoretically, we're not really sure what black holes are, but our galaxy we live in now comes from a supermassive black hole at the center of our galaxy, which is in Sagittarius. I forget the exact markers. And when you do shamanic experiences, that's source. So when my experience of going back to source was I entered that black hole and you get shown star paths. So that's where I think some of this material is coming from as I experienced it shamanically, is that return to a source, which means a return to the source of matter. It's a source of where your electrons and atomic structure comes from, okay? That's how I experienced it.
It even kind of filters into astrology because astrology is these astrological influences on our lives. How do we get to be the way we are? And then if you know there's this template out there, well, can you take a proactive step and try to game that template? Can you try to manifest a person who embodies kingship or should have a huge impact on reality And then it gets even weirder because you'll hear about the Moonchild rituals and the Jack Parsons stuff and the Whore of Babylon trying to invoke this and that. Because what is that ritual? It's trying to impregnate a woman ritually, maybe with a spiritual impregnation.
Parthenogenesis.
Yes. Well, at a specific time, which is like kind of cosmic timing. It's kind of like it's right next to astrology, very astrology adjacent. Do you think this kind of stuff goes on behind the scenes?
One of the things I talk about in the Familiars and Witchcraft book is that there was lots of messianic births. And even in the Bible, not just Mary was impregnated by God, but her cousin Elizabeth at the same time also gets a baby by Holy Spirit. So this used to happen all the time. There was these demonic babies that came in, and this is actually talked about in Greek mythology. Every time Zeus comes in and gives a baby to a human woman, what's the difference? I see no difference. Jesus was born in that demonic fashion and wasn't the only one. Saint John the Baptist was Elizabeth's son. And when Mary goes to see Elizabeth and says, I was told by Gabriel I'm going to have God's baby. And Elizabeth goes, don't worry, honey. He said the same thing to me. I'm also pregnant. And then Elizabeth gives birth to Saint John the Baptist, who was miraculously conceived.
Really? I never hear that.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Yeah. It's in the Bible. Saint John the Baptist, there were cults that he was the real Messiah and Jesus was a scapegoat or a cover-up because Saint John the Baptist was miraculously conceived according to literature, and there were cults about him. But they're not even the first. Every Greek, these are called the demigods, okay? So we're talking about operation of Babylon. This is a demigod operation where Zeus comes down and has sex with a woman and you give birth to a hybridized. I had a book about this, but it was turned down by every publisher I gave it to. I know. That's what I said. I was like,
ebook
what?
it.
Right? The history of every mythology and almost every culture, there's stories of gods coming down and impregnating women. The astrological significance is that if you do it during a certain opening or portal, you can direct which deity you get to come impregnate you. If we look at Jesus, it's correlated with the winter solstice, which is when we enter source, like I said. So it's a perfect example of exactly what you just said, where there's an actual astrological correspondence to a deity begatting a demigod. But this is prevalent in many cultures throughout history. This is not a singular event of Jesus the Christ.
Right, right. I wonder how much of it goes on in modern times. I wonder if the royal family tries to organize births in this way. I wonder if there's people put into prominent positions in society that have been born this way.
Why wouldn't there be?
Yeah, why wouldn't there be? I mean, I don't know if you know the Kamala Harris thing. People are going to get sick of me talking about this, but her relevancy is almost over, so it'll go away on its own. But the constellation Andromeda, the two brightest stars in Andromeda are Kamala and Harris backwards. It's exact, letter for letter. So you reverse engineer that, and you're like, well, how can that happen? The stars have been there forever. So a person was born or engineered for public life and given this fake name and put out there for a little while.
I've given several examples that, including Prince. When Prince was born, rising on his star chart was the star Prince.
Really? I didn't know there was a star Prince.
I'm so glad you're talking about it because I thought I was the only one that mentions that.
Well, it starts to make you think about like, what are these public figures? What is public life and public culture and politics? Are these people crafted in a lab and designed?
Idolatry.
Well, yeah, maybe it's a lot of that.
They're the modern relevance of idolatry, which if you trace back, these deities are the fathers and mothers of the demigods as well. So I don't think it's a weird connection, what you're saying now, because that's the practice of idolatry.
Right. And people definitely idolatrized, if that's a term, Kamala Harris or anyone in a position of their party's leadership.
Adulation. One of the things I saw was when someone is receiving, and I live in LA, so I've seen it with my eyeballs, when someone's receiving adulation, they have like a weird shine to them. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but like I saw Angelina Jolie in real life and she was glowing.
Yeah, she's sucking up a lot of energy from the people out there.
It's an adulation glow. The Rock has it too. I'm not anyone to judge, but it was like an external shine, is how I would say.
Right. Well, I've had people talk about the Greeks when they would do these performances, like the original idea of theater was embodying the gods. It was kind of more channeling adjacent. And now in the modern times, we have Hollywood and these people play these characters. But are these characters, are they kind of channeling in a way? Or if you look at a person's career, like Jim Carrey, he embodies the Green Man a lot. The Mask, the Grinch, Ace Ventura is like a wild man, very, very Green Man adjacent.
You might say they're typecast into these caricatures.
And it's like, who's pulling the strings on that? Is it even conscious? There's a lot of weird stuff going on there. But it's funny that in the beginning, in the first hour, you mentioned libel and slander, and like maybe that's happened to me. The only time I can remember a cease and desist was, I won't say a name, but there was a woman who was an occult researcher, and through her research, she engaged with people in the occult milieu. Like she was kind of deep in it, kind of a reckless researcher, we might say, but I think she was motivated by just trying to learn. But someone on my subreddit, if you know Reddit, anyone can post on Reddit. Someone on my subreddit posted about a speculation that she was a mother, that her own child was born from this sort of ritual, a moonchild ritual. I didn't say anything. It just existed on the subreddit. And somebody emailed me a cease and desist that if I didn't get that off of there right away, there would be all kinds of ramifications. And I don't know, but the fact that someone is watching for that and sending me a very aggressive takedown notice, I'm like, that makes me think there might be something to it, more than if it was just ignored.
It's unusual, I would say, because if she's not even alive at that point, then who is her advocate that is trying to track and remove any of that information? And this is what we see all over social media. Anyone can just say whatever accusation they want without verification. Then people are going to come after you and you might suffer as a result. So if you were to suffer, I would say they shouldn't get to say that.
I guess, but where is the line? Because there's so many people, like, let's just say now we have tens of thousands of people listening. Any one thing you say could trigger a person. So can we not say anything? It just becomes like the crime is the action. The crime is taking the action. So if you don't take the action, I feel like we should be able to speculate and converse about possibilities.
I think open discussion should be permitted. But if someone receives a negative thing that could be direct, right? If I'm directly targeting or lying about someone, I should be accountable for that. But I feel like that should be addressed correctly also, and I shouldn't have to deal with a lynch mob or not have a say. I don't feel like that's correct either. But their action is incorrect at that point, right? Not the person that made a statement.
Is it even organic, though, is another question.
Well, then you get into scapegoating of like, it wasn't me, it was the one-armed man, right? Or the devil made me do it. So how do we get accountability or responsibility if someone isn't coerced or influenced? And it needs discernment the whole way. I get so pissed. And I live in LA where everybody will like inappropriately target individuals to get money from them.
Oh, Diddy leaned on that for a long time.
That's awful.